Tonight, you return to the market square, where once, on a quiet afternoon, the shadows stopped moving. The air was still, the sun hung in its place, and time itself seemed to pause just for you. This is not a story to be solved, but a memory to be carried, like the last note of a song that lingers long after it has ended. So settle in, let your eyes grow heavy, and walk with me through those unmoving hours. It began, you remember, as one of those mornings that seemed to hum quietly before you had even stepped outside. The air was cool but not cold, a mild early autumn coolness that carried the faint, damp scent of cobblestones, washed clean by a gentle night rain. You could hear, even before you saw it, the slow stirring of the market square, the muted thump of crates being set down, the scrape of wooden shutters being pulled open, and the faint creak of ropes as canvas awnings were drawn overhead to soften the sun's light. There was the smell of fresh bread, still warm from ovens, mingling with the sharper temps of cured cheese, the earthy sweetness of apples stacked in neat pyramids, and the faint mineral smell of the stone fountain at the square's center. You walked there as you always did, each footstep softened by the thin layer of fallen leaves. And when you turned the corner from the narrow lane into the open space, you were greeted by the familiar spread of stalls and tables, the same merchants, the same calls, the same gentle clamor of voices that had filled your mornings for as long as you could recall. The sun was already well above the roofs, though it was filtered through a pale veil of high, unmoving clouds. It gave the square a silvered glow, as if the light had been rubbed smooth, without any harshness, without the crisp contrast of shadow and shine that you expected. The shadows were there, of course, the outlines of stall posts falling across the stones, the shapes of baskets and crates resting in muted shade. But when you glanced again, you noticed they sat in exactly the same place as they had when you first arrived. You thought at first it was your mind playing a quiet trick, that perhaps you had not been paying attention, that perhaps the sun's passage was still too early to notice. Yet, as the minutes folded into one another, you found that nothing shifted, nothing stretched or shortened, nothing drifted along the ground as the day wore on. It was as though the light had been poured into the square like water in a bowl, still and unbroken, holding everything in a perfect, unmoving frame. You wandered between the stalls with your basket in hand, taking your time to greet the faces you knew. Old Bran the baker handed you a small heel of bread to taste, the crust still warm and the steam carrying that familiar yeasty comfort that seemed to curl into your chest. He didn't seem to notice anything unusual, chatting instead about the small harvest festival to come next week. At the table of the herbalist, sprigs of rosemary and thyme lay in neat bundles, their resinous scent mingling with the soft spice of dried cloves in open jars. You touched a leaf between your fingers, feeling its velvety texture, and for a moment your eyes strayed again to the stones beneath your feet, to the shadow of the herbalist's table, which clung precisely to the same seam between cobblestones that it had when you first approached. It should have moved by now. You knew it should have. The fountain in the square's heart gave a soft, steady splash, each droplet catching the silvery light like tiny beads of glass before they vanished into the water's smooth surface. You paused there for a time, leaning your basket on the low stone wall, watching the way the ripples moved, gentle, concentric, unhurried. Yet, even here, you saw that the shadow of the fountain's rim lay perfectly still, as though it had been painted onto the ground. You placed your hand upon the stone, and it was neither warm nor cold, just a neutral, steady temperature, as if it had settled into some balance beyond the reach of the sun's changing touch. The air, too, seemed to hold that same balance, cool yet mild, without the gradual climb you would expect as morning edged toward noon. You might have asked someone about it, yet you found yourself reluctant to disturb the calm with words. It wasn't frightening, not exactly. It was more like stepping into a moment in which the clock had quietly decided to rest, allowing you to move at your own pace without the usual tug of minutes slipping past. The merchants moved, of course, arranging their goods, exchanging coins, chatting softly with customers, but there was a subtle slowness to their gestures, a grace as if each motion had been given more room to breathe. A boy chased a hoop along the far side of the square, and though he laughed, his voice seemed to carry more softly than it should, as though the air itself had decided to muffle all sharpness. You took a seat on the bench beside the weaver's stall, where bolts of linen leaned in gentle stacks against the wall. The fabric smelled faintly of clean cotton and sunlight, though the sunlight was pale and unmoving. The weaver herself, a woman with kind eyes and hair tied back in a neat knot, sat at her small loom, her hands moving in a quiet rhythm. You found yourself watching not the weaving, but the way her own shadow lay across her feet, perfectly aligned, unchanged, even as her fingers shifted the threads. You thought, perhaps, that if you sat long enough, you might begin to understand the reason for it, as though the square were keeping a secret, and only those who waited in stillness might hear it. Time, if it was passing at all, seemed to do so in a way that did not mark you. There was no hunger creeping in, no ache of standing too long, no fatigue in your arms from the basket's weight. The smells of the market remained constant, as though the air had decided on a particular moment and held it gently in place. Somewhere in the soft distance, a bell rang, not the urgent, calling kind, but a slow, measured toll that seemed to have no beginning or end. You could not tell where it came from, only that it threaded through the silver light like a ribbon, neither growing louder nor fainter, simply existing in the same way the shadows did. When at last you rose to leave, you found yourself taking one last, slow look at the square. It appeared exactly as it had when you first stepped into it, every stall in its place, every shadow in its shape, the fountain's ripples continuing without haste or change. You stepped into the narrow lane once more, the cool air brushing softly against your cheek, and as the market's sounds faded behind you, you felt as though you had been walking through a page in a book that someone had forgotten to turn. The shadows, you thought, would still be there when you returned, holding the moment exactly as it was, waiting for you to step into it again. You remember the following morning as if it were pressed like a dried flower between the pages of your mind, its edges softened by time, but its colors still faintly lingering. The rain had come again in the night, not heavily, but in a slow, steady way that had left the world hushed under a thin sheen of dampness. The rooftops shone in muted grays, and the cobblestones were darkened, their uneven surfaces catching the light in small, scattered mirrors. As you stepped from your doorway, the air met you like a cool hand laid gently against the face, clean, unhurried, with that faint, earthy scent of soil and wet wood. Your boots found their rhythm easily, the quiet percussion of leather on stone, blending into the distant murmur of the square, waking to its day. There was no rush in you, only the curiosity that had taken root after the stillness of yesterday. A wondering that had lodged itself somewhere behind your ribs and refused to fade. The narrow lanes wound their way, as they always did, lined with houses whose plastered walls bore the marks of years, faded colors, and ivy that clung stubbornly even through the changing seasons. You passed the old window with the blue shutters, still propped open with a piece of driftwood, and the wooden sign of the cooper's shop that swung slightly in the morning breeze. The wind was light today, carrying the faintest salt from the far-off river, and as you walked, you noticed that the light had that same pale, brushed quality as before. It was not dim, yet it was softer than true daylight ought to be, as though the sun had decided to keep its warmth hidden somewhere high above the clouds. The thought came to you, uninvited but certain, that perhaps, when you turned the final corner into the market square, you would find the shadows exactly as they had been the day before. And so it was. The square opened before you, in its familiar, open-armed way, each stall in place, each awning stretched above tables of wares, each person in their quiet orbit of movement and exchange. The fountain's gentle spilling was the same, the arcs of water glistening like polished silver threads before they met the pool below. You paused without meaning to, letting your gaze sweep across the ground. There, beneath the cloth seller's awning, the same neat shadow traced the edge of the table in a straight, unbroken line, touching the same crack in the cobblestone it had touched yesterday. The tall wooden post by the baker's stall cast its long silhouette across the very same stone, as if held there by an invisible hand. The realization did not startle you this time. Instead, it drew from you a deep, quiet breath, as though you were stepping once again into a room where nothing had been touched or disturbed since your last visit. You drifted first toward the spice merchant, whose small wooden jars were arranged with a kind of reverence, each labeled in a neat, looping script. The air around the stall was warm with scent, cinnamon's soft sweetness, nutmeg's mellow depth, the sharper lift of dried orange peel. And when the merchant lifted a small spoonful toward you, the powder was fine as silk, releasing its fragrance at the gentlest touch of air. You spoke only briefly, a polite exchange, and yet, even in the conversation, there was that same unhurried tone, as though neither of you were tethered to any particular moment. When you stepped away, your fingers still carried the faint dust of spice, a subtle reminder that lingered as you moved deeper into the square. A musician sat beneath the bare branches of the square's single elm, his instrument a weathered lute whose wood was worn smooth where countless hands had rested. He played without glancing at the few who paused to listen, his music a low, curling melody that seemed to wander as much as it sang. You sat upon the low wall near him, your basket resting against your knee, and let the notes fold themselves around you. In their gentle repetition, you began to imagine that they, too, were caught in the stillness of this place, each phrase circling back upon itself like ripples meeting the edge of the fountain's stone. The musician's shadow lay at his side, perfectly shaped to the curve of his seated posture, not bending or lengthening, no matter how the minutes passed. From where you sat, you could see the seam between light and shade across the square's stones, as precise as if it had been drawn with a fine brush. People crossed it without hesitation, their steps carrying them from one quality of light into another. Yet the line itself never shifted, never softened. You thought of how, in the usual turning of the day, such borders would blur and wander, slipping away as the sun moved on its slow path. But here, it was as though the square had been folded out of the ordinary world, set apart in some gentle, unchanging interval. It made you wonder if anyone else saw it, or if they walked and bartered and laughed, as though nothing were unusual at all. You rose again and made your way toward the farthest corner, where the flower seller kept her buckets and baskets in neat, staggered rows. Today they were filled with deep burgundy dahlias, pale cream roses, and sprigs of lavender that sent their scent drifting into the air like a quiet song. You brushed your fingertips against one of the blooms, the petals cool and firm beneath your touch, each one holding a bead of water from the night's rain. The flower seller smiled at you, her hands busy arranging stems, and when she spoke, her voice was low and warm, as though it belonged in the same softened light that bathed the square. You bought a small bunch, not because you had planned to, but because it felt right to carry something living and fragrant out of this place. Before leaving, you lingered again by the fountain, letting your eyes rest on the shimmer of water, the silver ring of its sound against the stillness. Your reflection wavered there, touched by tiny ripples, yet even that seemed slower than it should be, the movement more languid, more reluctant to break. A child approached the fountain with a cup, dipping it into the water with care, and you noticed that his shadow lay unchanged beside him, as though it, too, were waiting for something you could not name. When at last you stepped away and turned toward the lane that would carry you home, you felt that same strange mixture you had felt the day before, a blend of peace and wonder, as though you had walked through a place suspended between breaths. The flowers in your hand released their scent into the cool air, the petals brushing against your wrist with each step, and you thought that perhaps tomorrow or the day after you might come again, just to see if the shadows still waited where you had left them. On the third morning you returned. It was not out of simple curiosity, but out of something gentler and less definable. A pull that felt almost like remembering a melody you had once known by heart. The day began with a delicate mist that clung low over the rooftops and curled in the corners of the narrow lanes, softening edges and making the world seem half forgotten. The air was cooler now, with the faint bite of a season preparing to turn, and it carried with it the scent of wood smoke rising from early fires. You wrapped your scarf a little closer around your neck as you stepped out, the wool brushing against your skin in a way that made you feel both present and distant, as though you were walking through a page of your own memory. The streets underfoot were damp, the stones darkened and slick in places, and every so often a bead of water would fall from a windowsill above and break into a tiny constellation on the ground. The market's approach was slower this time, your steps unhurried, your senses drawn to small details you might otherwise have passed over. The way the ivy along a low wall was tipped with droplets that trembled at the slightest stir of wind, the faint crack in a painted sign where the wood beneath had shifted over the years, the hollow echo of your own tread where the lane narrowed between tall walls. And then, as you knew it would, the square opened before you, quiet in its own way despite the familiar murmur of life within it. The silvered light was there again, thin and even, seeming to rest upon every surface without bending or deepening. The shadows waited in their places, precise as the memory you had carried from the days before, and you felt that peculiar comfort of seeing something unchanged in a world where everything else so often drifts away. You wandered first toward the bread stall, where the loaves lay in neat rows, their crusts browned and dusted lightly with flour. The smell was rich, warm and steady, not shifting as the minutes passed, as though it had been caught in the exact moment of its most inviting promise. The baker greeted you in that same soft voice, offering a slice of dark rye spread thin with honey, the sweetness clinging to your tongue in a way that seemed to hold the taste of summer meadows long past. You noticed, as you chewed slowly, that the steam rising from the loaves looked the same as it had when you first arrived, curling upward but never dispersing entirely, suspended in the air as if reluctant to leave. Crossing the square, you passed the leatherworker's stall, where belts and satchels hung from wooden frames, their scent a mingling of cured hide and the faint oil used to keep them supple. Your fingers brushed a strap, feeling the smoothness of its surface, and you thought of how such an object, made to last, carried with it the quiet patience of hands that had shaped it. Here, too, the shadows beneath the frames were still, holding their forms without even the smallest shift, and it seemed to you that they lent the leather itself a kind of timeless weight. At the far side of the square, the fountain glimmered, as it always did, each droplet falling in the same patient arc, the same unhurried splash. You leaned upon the worn stone rim, feeling the cool smoothness beneath your palms, and listened to the way the water's sound folded gently into the market's murmurs. It was a sound without urgency, without a beginning or an end, as though it had been playing here since long before you first set foot in the square and would continue long after. Your reflection lay upon the water's surface, soft-edged in the pale light, and you found yourself studying the way it seemed to hover there, not shifting with the passing of clouds or the tilt of the sun. Nearby, the old man who sold second-hand books had set out his small collection along the edge of his stall. Their spines, worn and faded, bore titles in letters half erased by time. You picked one up, the leather binding cool to the touch, and leafed through pages that smelled faintly of dust and pressed leaves. The words inside were of no particular urgency, simple tales and quiet histories, and you read them standing there as though you had nowhere else to be. The old man watched you with eyes that seemed to know the pace of this place, his own shadow folded neatly at his feet, as patient as he was. In one corner of the square, under the overhang of a narrow awning, a woman sat with a basket of tiny glass bottles, each filled with oils or tinctures. The glass caught the still light and held it like small drops of captured sky. She uncorked one for you, and the scent of lavender rose to meet you, clean and calming, as if it had been distilled, not from flowers alone, but from the very air of quiet evenings. You closed your eyes for a moment, breathing it in, and felt the edges of the world soften a little more. When you opened them, the line between shadow and sun still held perfectly in place, as if no time at all had passed. You did not speak much that day, for it seemed that words here were less necessary than they were elsewhere. The square gave its own language, in scents, in the feel of worn stone underfoot, in the weight of stillness that was not heavy but steady. You found yourself sitting on the bench beside the weaver's stall once more, the fabric's faint fragrance of cotton and dye drifting toward you. She worked without haste, the shuttle moving back and forth in a rhythm that felt older than the market itself, and you let your gaze wander over the scene, the still shadows, the silver light, the gentle motions of those who lived within them. When you finally stood to leave, you took one last, lingering look across the square, as if to memorize not only the arrangement of stalls and faces, but the very quality of the light itself. The mist in the streets beyond had begun to lift, revealing more of the world outside. Yet here everything remained as you had found it. You stepped back into the lane, the scent of lavender still clinging to your hands, and felt that same quiet pull as before, a certainty that this place, with its unmoving shadows and its unchanging light, was waiting for you in a way no other place ever had. By the fourth morning, the decision to return felt less like a choice and more like following the current of a river, whose waters you had quietly entered without noticing. You woke early, before the first strokes of light had reached your window, and lay for a time listening to the muted, muffled world that exists just before day begins. The room was cool, the air carrying a faint trace of yesterday's fire in the hearth, and when you touched the wooden sill, the grain felt dry beneath your fingertips, as if it had soaked in every season that had ever passed through it. You rose slowly, dressing in the gentle half-light, and stepped out into streets that seemed to hum faintly with the promise of another day unchanged. The air held the scent of morning bread being baked somewhere nearby, a fragrance so steady and warm that it seemed to come not from one place, but from the stones themselves. The cobbled lane curved ahead, leading you past shuttered windows whose hinges creaked softly when the wind teased them. There was a faint dew on the iron railings, each droplet trembling in place, and you found yourself slowing to touch one with your fingertip, watching it cling stubbornly before sliding down to join the next. The world was in no hurry, and neither were you. When you reached the square, it greeted you in that same hushed, suspended way, as though it had been waiting with quiet patience since the last time you left. The light was there again, pale, even without the slightest bend or shift, holding to the stones as faithfully as ink on paper. The air within the square had a particular stillness to it, not the stillness of emptiness, but of something perfectly balanced, where every sound and motion belonged exactly where it was. You noticed first the soft clatter of pottery from the stall near the fountain, where the potter had arranged bowls and cups in gentle towers of muted earth tones. The glaze on each vessel caught the light like water frozen mid-motion, and when you lifted one, it was cool and smooth in your hands, its weight speaking of care and patience in its making. The potter spoke little, his smile as steady as the rest of the square, and you wondered if he, too, felt the pull of this unchanging hour, or if it had always been this way for him. From there you wandered toward the corner where the fruit seller kept her baskets of pears, plums, and figs. The air was scented with their quiet ripeness, a sweetness just on the edge of bloom, and when you pressed the skin of a plum, it gave slightly as though it had been waiting for exactly this moment of touch. She offered you one, and you bit into it slowly, the flesh cool against your tongue, the juice holding a taste of late summer that did not belong to this hour, yet somehow fit within it perfectly. Around her feet, the baskets cast the same shadows they had the day before and the day before that, their outlines drawn in stillness, untouched by time's hand. At the fountain, you found a seat on the low stone wall, tracing the worn carvings with your fingertips. They were not elaborate, just small, curling shapes, perhaps the mark of hands long gone, but they held a certain softness, as though they had been touched often over the years, each hand leaving the faintest echo of itself. You leaned forward, watching the water spill in its measured rhythm, each droplet holding its form longer than seemed possible before it met the pool below. The sound was neither loud nor faint, simply constant, as though it had always been there and always would be. Beyond the fountain, under the elm's bare branches, the musician played again. This time a melody that rose and fell in a pattern you thought you might remember. It wound through the air like a thread of smoke, curling around the stillness without disturbing it, and you found yourself following it across the square. His shadow lay exactly as before, shaped to the bend of his posture, unshaken by the invisible turning of the sky. You closed your eyes for a moment and let the notes carry you, not to a place but to a feeling, one of being held gently in the space between one breath and the next. There was, in a far corner you had not lingered in before, a small stall selling beeswax candles. The scent reached you before you saw them, warm and honeyed, carrying with it a faint whisper of the fields where the bees had flown. The candles stood in neat rows, their soft golden surfaces catching the unmoving light. You picked one up, feeling its smoothness and the faint tackiness that came from true beeswax, and imagined the way its flame might move, free and alive, in contrast to the stillness here. The seller, a quiet woman with eyes the color of worn wood, wrapped it for you in brown paper, her hands moving as though each fold were part of some ritual learned long ago. You stayed longer than you intended, though time's meaning seemed to dissolve in the air of the square. There was no sense of hours passing, no shifting of shadows to mark the day's turning. You spoke briefly with the herbalist, who offered you a sprig of dried mint, the leaves crisp and aromatic, and you walked with it in your hand, crushing it lightly between your fingers now and then, just to breathe in its clean, cool scent. Everywhere you looked, the market's life moved in its gentle rhythm. The exchange of coins, the weighing of goods, the soft sound of fabric being folded. Yet it was a rhythm without progression, a circle rather than a line. When you finally stepped toward the lane that would carry you home, you turned back, as you always did, to take in the whole of the square once more. The scene was exactly as you had found it, the light pale and unwavering, the shadows still and faithful, the sounds and scents mingling in their patient dance. You held the wrapped candle in your hand, the faint scent of honey clinging to you, and thought of how, when lit, its flame might cast its own shadows, ones that would move and flicker in a way this place did not allow, one you could return to at any time and find exactly as you left it. You did not hurry, for you knew it would be there still, holding itself in that perfect pause, waiting for the moment you chose to step back into its light. You remember stepping past the edge of the market square that day, letting your feet guide you without hurry, as though the stillness in the air had slowed even your heartbeat. The cobblestones here were older, uneven, their surfaces worn smooth by the weight of centuries, and you could feel the faint dips beneath your soles as you walked. A gentle wind brushed against your cheek, carrying the faint scent of dried herbs from the apothecary's open shutters, though the air itself seemed reluctant to move, as if every current of breeze had been coaxed into silence. The shadows from the square still lingered behind you like unblinking watchers, and while you could not see them from here, you carried their unmoving weight in the back of your mind, like a stone in the pocket of your thoughts. Along the narrow lane, baskets of figs and dates rested against the walls of shuttered stalls, their colors warm yet muted in the pale light. A pair of linen curtains swayed almost imperceptibly in the doorway of a seamstress's shop, and you found yourself watching them for far too long, mesmerized by the slow rhythm of their motion, as if each movement was drawn out to its most languid form. Somewhere far above, you heard the creak of a wooden sign swinging, not hurriedly, but in long, patient arcs, its metal hinges groaning softly with each turn. The sound was so gentle and infrequent that you almost forgot it between each swing, until the next creak reminded you that time was passing here, but not as it should. You passed a fountain at the center of a small crossing where two lanes met, its stone basin weathered and darkened by age. Water should have spilled from the carved mouth of a stone lion, but instead the stream hung motionless, each droplet suspended in a delicate arc like beads of glass strung on invisible thread. You leaned closer, your reflection wavering slightly beneath the surface, and for a moment you thought you saw your own shadow leaning beside you. But when you glanced down, the shape was exactly as it had been that morning, sharp and clear, yet unnervingly still, its edges as defined as if drawn in ink. You did not linger long, for the sight stirred a quiet unease in your chest, and instead you continued on, each step accompanied by the soft, uneven sound of your own breathing. The lane eventually curved, leading you to a row of old brick houses whose balconies leaned forward as if eager to whisper their stories to passers-by. Laundry hung between them, pale sheets and faded tunics stirring faintly in the breeze, though their movement seemed to echo the same slow rhythm you had seen all morning. A cat lay curled upon a sunlit step, its fur patterned like smoke, and it watched you with eyes half-lidded in contentment. It did not rise or twitch its tail, but simply blinked once, as though acknowledging your presence before slipping back into its quiet watchfulness. You thought of the cats you had seen in the square earlier, how they too had seemed to know something you did not, and the thought followed you as you moved along, weaving through the drowsy labyrinth of streets. Here, the smells were richer freshly baked bread cooling on a windowsill, the earthy musk of sacks of grain stacked beside a miller's door, the faint tang of cured meat hanging in the dimness of a butcher's stall. You found comfort in these scents, as if they were anchors to the ordinary world, reminders that life still pulsed beneath the strange stillness. Yet, with each inhalation, you noticed how the air felt slightly thicker, as though the day's heat had pressed down upon it, trapping everything in a dream that could not quite wake. At last you emerged into another open space, smaller than the market square, but no less still. It was a quiet courtyard, bordered by low stone walls, with a fig tree at its center, its leaves casting wide, unmoving shadows across the ground. The fruit hung heavy and ripe, their skins splitting slightly to reveal the deep red flesh within, and a single bee hovered near one before pausing mid-flight, its wings caught in some invisible stillness. You reached out, not to touch, but to feel the air around it, half expecting your fingers to brush against something solid where there should have been nothing at all. Yet the air was empty, warm, and faintly sweet, and you withdrew your hand as if you had disturbed a sleeping thing. You sat for a while on the edge of the low wall, letting your gaze wander over the stillness as though it were a painting, somewhere far away, perhaps back toward the market square. You thought you heard the faint toll of a bell, though its sound was stretched and softened, as if passing through layers of cloth. It might have been real, or only something your memory was trying to offer you, letting it echo quietly within. And in that moment, with your hands resting loosely in your lap and your eyes half closed, you felt as though the world had folded into a single, unbroken pause, a breath held gently, neither released nor drawn in again. When you rose, it was not with urgency, but with the same unhurried grace that the day seemed to grant everything. You walked away from the courtyard, tracing the curve of another narrow lane, each step falling in rhythm with the slow sway of the curtains, the creak of the sign, the blink of the cat. And though you could not say where you were going, you felt certain you were moving deeper into the heart of something that could not be explained, only wandered through like a dream you hoped would never end. You remember walking deeper into the square, your steps carrying you over cobblestones whose warmth still lingered from the late morning sun, though the sun itself seemed not to move. It was a strange, delicate warmth, the kind that sinks quietly into your skin, unhurried, as if time itself had forgotten how to pass. The air held a faint sweetness, like the breath of an old bakery that had not opened its shutters for years, but still kept a memory of sugar and cinnamon in its walls. The shadows of awnings and signboards stretched long and still, their edges so crisp it felt as if they had been painted on the stones rather than cast by light. You noticed that when you moved, your own shadow followed as it should, yet those around you, the shadows of stalls, of baskets, of hanging garlands of herbs, did not shift at all, as if they belonged to another hour entirely. You found yourself drawn toward the heart of the square where the old fountain stood, its water still and glassy, reflecting the same pattern of clouds you had seen when you first arrived. Each cloud unmoved, a white brushstroke fixed against a blue canvas. The sound of water, which you expected, was absent. Instead, you could almost hear the quiet creak of the stone itself, as though it were sighing under the weight of the years. A pigeon perched upon the rim did not so much as twitch, its eyes unblinking, its head forever turned toward the west. You reached out without thinking, and the cool air above the fountain felt thick, like the hush of a cathedral where even whispers seemed too loud. It made you feel as though you had stepped not into a place, but into a preserved moment, carefully placed here for you to discover. Around the fountain, market stalls stood open but unattended. A crate of apples gleamed with an impossible freshness, their skins taut and dappled with sun, yet you knew the sun's touch had not changed since you first saw them. You leaned closer to one, smelling the faint tang of ripeness, and were startled to realize that the scent was neither faint nor strong, but balanced in some perfect middle state, as if the fruit had been held at the exact instant between underripe and overripe. A strand of blue cloth from the stall's awning hung loose, unmoving in the air, its fibers catching the light in such a way that they seemed spun from something finer than cotton. You reached out to brush it with your fingertips, and it was soft, so soft you almost doubted it was real, yet your touch made no ripple in its shape, no tremble in its line. The silence here was unlike the silence of an empty place. It was the silence of presence, of things watching without moving, of breath held endlessly between one second and the next. You found yourself lowering your voice, though you were alone, because speaking aloud felt as though it might disturb some delicate balance you did not understand. Somewhere at the edge of the square, a scent of roasting chestnuts drifted in, warm and faintly smoky, curling around you like an old song. Yet there was no fire, no vendor, no sound of wood crackling. It was as if the air itself had remembered a winter evening long past and decided to keep it alive here. You circled slowly, feeling the weight of stillness press against you from every side. But it was not heavy in a way that frightened you. Instead, it felt like being held in a memory that was too precious to be let go. A moment too lovely to allow the wind or the sun to shift it. Your fingertips brushed the edge of a wooden counter, the grain smooth from years of touch, and the faint warmth in it surprised you, for you could not tell whether it came from the day or from the many hands that had once leaned there. The world seemed to breathe in such a slow, imperceptible way that you began to wonder if perhaps you had been the one who stopped moving, and everything else was quietly carrying on in a rhythm too slow for your eyes to catch. At the far side of the square, near where the cobblestones gave way to a narrow lane, you noticed an old chair sitting just outside a shuttered shop. Its cushion was sun-faded, the fabric thin, but a single folded blanket rested on it, as if someone had only stepped away for a moment. You placed your hand on the back of the chair and felt the faintest indentation in the cushion, a whisper of warmth, as though someone had just risen from it. The blanket smelled faintly of lavender and dry summer grass, and the scent made you feel an ache of longing for something you could not name, a season that may never have belonged to you at all. As you stood there, you realized that you were not searching for an explanation anymore. You were simply letting the stillness wash over you. Each detail a thread in a tapestry that seemed to have been woven for the sole purpose of being looked at in this unmoving light. It was neither morning nor afternoon, neither busy nor empty. It was a place outside the calendar, a moment without an ending, a breath held in the palm of the day. You stayed there until you could no longer tell whether your heart was keeping time with the quiet square or with something older and slower, buried deep beneath the stones. And when you finally turned to leave, you felt as though you had been entrusted with a secret that could never be spoken, only carried, like a shadow that never moves, yet never fades. You walk slowly toward the fountain at the very heart of the market square, drawn as though by some quiet, unseen current, the way a leaf might drift toward the center of a still pond. Its stone basin, worn smooth by centuries of touch and weather, cradles water that does not ripple, not even when a faint breeze brushes against your cheek and passes over its surface. The air here smells faintly of cool stone and a lingering trace of lavender from the flower seller's stall nearby, though you do not recall seeing her today. You lean against the edge, the coolness seeping into your palms, and for a long moment you simply watch the way the water catches the frozen sunlight, holding it like an unspilled secret. The sound you expect, a gentle burble, a faint trickle, is absent, and in its place is a silence so deep it feels almost like a presence, as if the fountain itself is listening for something. You remember how, on any other day, the square would be scattered with laughter, the bright clink of coins, the rustle of baskets being set down, the low murmur of traders greeting one another. Today those sounds seem folded away into some invisible pocket of time. You see baskets still resting where they were set, brimming with figs, with pale loaves of bread, with bunches of herbs tied neatly with twine, but there are no hands reaching for them. There is a bench by the fountain, carved from wood darkened by rain and years, and on it rests a hata wide-brimmed straw, hatit's ribbon fluttering only when you draw near, though the air is not moving. You imagine the person who left it, perhaps stepping away just for a moment, though you know that no footsteps have sounded here for hours. The sunlight that covers the square feels different here, as though it has weight, as though it has settled down upon the stones and will not lift again. It is warm on your shoulders, yet not uncomfortably so, the kind of warmth that invites stillness rather than movement. Your eyes trace the shadow of the fountain's central column, and you see how it is etched sharply upon the ground, each curve and edge distinct, as though drawn with a hand that will never waver. You realize then that it has been exactly the same since you first arrived, and even now it clings to its place without shifting an inch. From where you stand, the market's archways frame narrow glimpses of streets beyond, each one bathed in the same unmoving glow, each shadow holding its shape as though pressed into the very stones. There is no urgency in you to explore them, only a soft curiosity, the kind one feels when watching clouds from a quiet hilltop, knowing they will pass eventually, but not needing them to. You notice, too, how the colors here seem deeper than before, blues richer, golds softer, greens somehow both muted and vivid. It feels like walking inside a painting that has been left to dry for years. The brushstrokes fixed in place, the moment eternal. The fountain's edge offers a place to rest, and you sit, your fingers brushing the smooth surface, tracing the shallow grooves left by time and weather. The stone feels cool beneath the sun, and you wonder how that is possible, how it can resist the day's warmth so easily. Your reflection looks back at you from the water, faint and wavering, though the water itself is perfectly still. It seems older than you, this reflection, as if it belongs to a version of yourself who has been here many times before, sitting in this same place, feeling the same quiet seep into their bones. You close your eyes briefly, and the light presses gently against your lids, painting the darkness with soft, shifting golds. When you open them again, your gaze drifts to the far side of the square, where the old bookshop stands, with its weathered green door half open. You think of the rows of spines inside, the scent of old paper and ink, the dust dancing in the shafts of sunlight that must be frozen there just as they are here. You imagine stepping in, running your hand along the shelves, feeling the raised letters on their worn covers, each one holding a story that might never be read again. The thought is not sad. It is simply part of the stillness, part of the way the day holds itself. Somewhere high above, a bell should mark the passing of the hour, yet none comes. The absence of sound becomes almost melodic in itself, a gentle hum that you feel more than hear, like the memory of music rather than the music itself. You sit a little longer, letting the air settle on your skin, letting the scent of lavender grow faint, almost imagined. There is no hurry to move on, for here in the center of the square, time is not something that can be lost. It feels as though you could remain until the light finally decides to change. And even then, you would not be leaving anything behind. And so you stay, leaning against the fountain's cool edge, listening to the silence, breathing in the sunlight that will not fade, and watching the shadows that do not move. Everything is as it is, and for now, that is enough. You find yourself wandering deeper into the quiet of the market, where the edges blur into places you seldom think about, those shadowed corners between shuttered stalls, where the air feels heavier and smells faintly of old cedar and dried herbs left too long in the sun. Here, away from the more open spaces, you notice the stillness even more acutely. It wraps around you like a soft, unmoving veil, so complete that even the smallest sound, the scrape of your shoe on the uneven cobblestones, seems to hang in the air longer than it should. There is a gentleness to the light here, as though it has grown tired of dancing, and chosen instead to rest upon the worn wooden beams and faded awnings. You reach out and trail your fingers along a stack of linen, the fabric cool and dry beneath your skin. holding the scent of lavender in its folds, as though someone had taken care to keep it safe for far longer than necessary. As you move, you catch sight of a small cart tucked away in a corner, its wheels caked with the pale dust of the square and its surface scattered with trinkets that seem oddly untouched by time, and a small metal bell whose surface is dulled yet warm to the touch, as if it has absorbed the sun's kindness over countless days. You do not know why you lift it, nor why you feel the need to ring it softly, but the sound that emerges is delicate, clear, and lingering, floating in the unmoving air as though reluctant to fade. For a moment, you think you hear an echo, not from the stone walls around you, but from somewhere softer, farther away, like a memory answering across years. You push the fabric aside gently, and the smell of old paper greets you dry, slightly sweet, like the scent that escapes when you open a box of forgotten letters. There are books here, their spines faded to warm browns and deep blues, some with titles you can still just make out, others worn completely smooth by the years. You trace the gilt lettering on one cover, feeling the slight rise beneath your fingertips, and it is as though your touch stirs some distant, sleeping story. You imagine sitting here for hours, reading by the strange, unmoving light, the square outside remaining forever caught in its gentle pause. Somewhere nearby, a ribbon of cool air drifts between the stalls, carrying with it a faint scent of something baking, perhaps bread, perhaps a pastry filled with fruit. You find yourself turning instinctively, expecting to see an open bakery door with its warmth spilling out. But there is nothing there, only the same still shapes, the same frozen shadows, as though the scent itself has been preserved in the air for you to discover without any source to claim it. You inhale deeply, holding on to it, letting it mix with the faint spice of cinnamon that lingers in the wooden beams overhead. At the far end of the row, you come across a bench of weathered oak, its surface smooth from the countless hands that must have touched it over the years. Someone has left a basket there, woven from willow and filled with dried flowers, yellow, blue, and soft white, still holding the faintest traces of their fragrance. You sit for a while, letting the stillness fold around you, listening to the quiet as though it were a kind of music. Your eyes wander over the shapes of the stalls, the curve of a clay jug, the way the unmoving shadows cling to the ground like stains. You feel as though you could close your eyes here and, upon opening them, find that the world outside the market has gone on without you. The hours lost entirely, the sun still caught in the same place in the sky. There is no rush to move on. The air feels like it belongs to a slower world, one that exists only in rare pockets, like the space between heartbeats or the last breath before sleep. You rise, eventually, your footsteps soft, and glance once more at the cart with its trinkets, at the bell that still seems to hum faintly with the memory of your touch, at the rows of books whose pages you have not yet turned. You leave them as they are, knowing they will be waiting, unchanged, should you ever wander this way again. You step softly onto the worn flagstones that lead toward the edge of the square, where a narrow alleyway opens like a quiet breath between two buildings. The air here feels cooler, as if the shadows that never moved within the market have spilled beyond it, carrying their stillness into this secluded place. You pause, running your fingers along the rough plaster of a sun-bleached wall, its texture dry and grainy beneath your touch, the faint scent of moss and old mortar rising from its crevices. The alley is lined with potted herbs, rosemary, thyme, and sage, each leaf a muted green, their edges curled slightly from the lingering warmth of the day. As you brush past them, a faint aroma rises, a tender whisper of earth and spice that seems to settle softly on your skin, inviting you to slow your breath and listen more closely to the silence. Further along, the alley curves gently, guiding you to a small wooden door, weathered and worn but still sturdy, its iron latch cold and smooth beneath your fingers. You imagine the hands that might have opened it long ago, the stories that might be held just beyond its frame. The faintest light slips through the cracks around the door, a delicate glow like the last glow of dusk, and you hesitate for a moment before pushing it open with the gentlest of motions. The room inside smells faintly of cedar and aged parchment, a quiet sanctuary where time seems folded in on itself. Dust motes drift lazily in the narrow beams of light, suspended as surely as the shadows outside, and you take a slow, deep breath, letting the calm seep into your bones. There is a table near the window, its surface scattered with objects, an old quill resting beside a faded journal, a small glass vial filled with amber liquid, and a bundle of dried lavender tied with twine. You reach out to touch the lavender, its brittle stems crunching softly under your fingers, the scent rising clear and sweet, mingling with the gentle hush of the room. The pages of the journal are yellowed and delicate, their edges softened by time, and you imagine the quiet hours someone must have spent here, writing thoughts and dreams that now drift like the dust in the still air. The light from the window does not shift, as if the sun itself is held captive just beyond the glass, and the room holds its breath in perfect stillness. Stepping back outside, the alley seems to exhale, releasing you slowly into the fading light of the square. The familiar scents of bread, baking, and herbs mingle with the cooler evening air, wrapping around you like a well-worn cloak. You find yourself drawn once more to the fountain, its water glassy and unmoving, reflecting the soft hues of the sky as it dims toward twilight. The shadows here lengthen but do not change, folding gently over the stones, like a whispered promise that nothing will disturb this quiet world. You sit again on the fountain's edge, your fingers tracing the smooth carvings worn by countless hands, and close your eyes briefly to let the stillness settle deep within. Around you, the market seems to hold its own breath, suspended between one moment and the next, and you realize that in this gentle pause there is a kind of grace, a quiet invitation to simply be, to feel the soft weight of the day's light and the cool brush of evening air without hurry or worry. You breathe in the mingled scents of lavender, bread, and stone, letting them fill you slowly like a soft melody that plays just beneath the surface of thought. When you open your eyes, the square is exactly as it was before, shadows still unmoving, light fixed and tender, and you know deep down that this moment will linger long after you have gone. You wander slowly away from the heart of the market square, your footsteps soft on the worn cobblestones that seem to hold the memory of every step taken before yours. The air here shifts subtly, carrying the faintest hint of evening chill mingled with the lingering warmth of the day, like a whispered farewell wrapped in a shawl of quiet twilight. Along the narrow street, the facades of old shops lean gently toward one another, their faded signs creaking softly in a breeze too gentle to stir the stillness of the shadows below. The scent of warm bread drifts faintly from an unseen oven, mingling with the dry, earthy aroma of crushed herbs laid out to dry on windowsills. The soft rustle of their brittle leaves barely audible in the hush around you. As you walk, you pass a narrow doorway, its wooden frame worn smooth from countless hands that have rested there through the years. You pause and lean your palm against it, feeling the cool grain beneath your fingers. A touch both familiar and strangely distant, as if it belongs to a time you have long since left behind, but can still almost reach. The quietness here is deep, a kind of silence that cradles you gently, inviting you to lean into it, to breathe slowly and sink into the softness of the moment. You close your eyes for just a heartbeat, and the warmth of the fading sun spills across your face like a tender caress. The air thick with the faint scent of jasmine from a garden hidden just beyond the alley. Continuing onward, you find yourself at the edge of a small square, one less grand than the market, but no less alive in its own quiet way. A single lamp post stands in its center, its ironwork delicate and curling like the branches of a tree frozen in bloom. The lamp is not lit, but the lingering light of day clings to it, casting a pale glow that softens the sharp edges of shadow and stone. Around the square, wooden benches rest empty beneath trees whose leaves hang heavy and still, their green deepened to a velvety richness in the dimming light. You imagine the gentle rustle they might have made in a breeze long since stilled, the soft chatter of birds that now only linger in memory. You take a seat on one of the benches, the wood smooth and cool beneath you, and let your hands rest loosely on your lap. The evening air feels like a soft blanket, wrapping around your shoulders and carrying with it the distant notes of a lute played somewhere beyond the rooftops. Melody slow and sweet, with the tender cadence of a lullaby meant to calm restless dreams. You listen, letting the music mingle with the scents and textures of this place, feeling the gentle pulse of time, slowed to a rhythm only you can hear. The world seems to hold its breath with you, neither hurrying toward night nor lingering in day, but poised delicately in the space between. In this quiet moment, you notice the faintest shimmer in the air, as if the day itself is beginning to fold in on itself, drawing soft curtains of twilight across the sky. The shadows around you deepen, but do not move, holding their shapes like old friends, waiting patiently for your return. You breathe in the cool, dry scent of stone and leaves, the hint of smoke from distant hearths, and the lingering sweetness of evening flowers, letting each sensation settle gently in your heart. The stillness here is not empty, it is full, filled with the weight of unspoken stories and the gentle unfolding of memory, like a soft light glowing beneath the surface of sleep. When you rise, it is without haste or urgency. The night has not yet fully claimed the square, and the day lingers like a sigh on your skin. You take one last look around the quiet benches, the still trees, the faint outlines of rooftops against the deepening sky, and step softly back toward the path that will lead you home. You carry with you the calm embrace of this moment, the tender hush of a day when shadows did not move, and the gentle promise that some memories are meant to be held close, quietly unfolding like the petals of a night-blooming flower. You find yourself drawn toward a narrow passageway that seems almost secret, tucked between two tall buildings whose walls rise like silent sentinels, watching over the square. The stones beneath your feet here are smoother, worn by countless footsteps and the gentle passage of time, their edges rounded and softened as if the very air around them has been whispered into stillness. The passage is shaded and cool, and the scent of damp earth mingles with the faint perfume of wisteria vines climbing the rough plaster walls, their pale purple blossoms nodding softly as though in quiet greeting. You reach out your hand to touch the cool stone, the texture rough but familiar, grounding you in this delicate moment suspended between day and night. Light filters in dappled patterns through the narrow gap above, casting gentle shapes that do not shift but rather seem to rest like patches of watercolor on the stone. You step forward slowly, your breath steady and calm, and the world feels hushed around you, as if you have slipped into a secret held deep within the heart of the old town. There is a quiet magic here, subtle and unspoken, the kind of magic woven into the smallest things: a cracked tile, a faded wooden shutter, the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a breathless wind. The air feels cool against your skin, but not cold. It carries a softness that invites you to pause, to breathe in the mingled scents of aged wood and crushed herbs that linger faintly in the corners of the passage. Ahead, the passage widens into a small courtyard tucked away from the wider world, where a lone olive tree spreads its silvery leaves against the sky. The branches sway, not with the wind, but as if frozen mid-motion, delicate shadows resting quietly beneath them like the pause between heartbeats. The ground is carpeted with fallen leaves, their dry crinkle muted by the thick layer of dust that cloaks the stones, and you feel the gentle crunch beneath your shoes as you walk toward the tree's base. Sitting there, surrounded by this secret stillness, you notice the soft warmth radiating from the earth, the lingering heat of a day held gently in the soil's embrace. You settle yourself against the trunk, your back resting against the rough bark, and close your eyes to the world. The air here is thick with the scent of olive blossoms and sun-baked stone, the mingled fragrance weaving through your senses like a quiet song. Somewhere far off, you imagine the distant murmur of the market square, but here it is only a soft echo, muted and gentle, as if heard through layers of time and memory. Your breathing slows further, sensing with the stillness that surrounds you, and you feel the slow unfolding of peace beneath your skin, a deep calm that seems to stretch beyond the boundaries of the day, beyond the edges of shadow and light. When you open your eyes again, the light has softened to a twilight hue, the sky painted in shades of lavender and rose that seem almost too delicate for the waking world. The courtyard feels cradled in a hush, the olive tree standing sentinel over this quiet moment, its leaves whispering secrets only the night will understand. You breathe in the cool, fragrant air one last time before rising slowly, the memory of this place settling softly in your heart like a precious, unspoken promise. As you step back into the passage, the world beyond awaits, unchanged yet transformed by the stillness you carry within, a gentle reminder that sometimes the most profound moments are those held quietly between breaths, in places where shadows dare not move. You find yourself walking slowly back toward the main square, the air cooler now, filled with the soft scent of damp earth and the faintest trace of jasmine, lingering like a secret whispered between the walls of the narrow streets. The cobblestones beneath your feet are cool to the touch, smooth and worn by years of footsteps, their shapes softened like memories fading gently into twilight. As you move through the quiet lanes, you notice how the fading light filters through the delicate latticework of balconies and window shutters, casting faint patterns that seem almost carved into the stones, yet remain perfectly still, as if time itself has folded gently around this place, preserving it in a delicate stillness. The air carries a subtle warmth from the day's sun, though it is softened now, diffused through the cooling evening. You breathe in deeply, catching the mingled scents of herbs drying on windowsill, sage, thyme, and lavender, all blending together into a quiet, fragrant lullaby that seems to settle softly on your skin and in your chest. Somewhere nearby, the faintest sound of water reaches youth, the gentle drip of a fountain, perhaps, or the distant rustle of leaves stirred by a breeze too light to move the unmoving shadows. You pause and let the sound wash over you like a slow, soothing tide, carrying you deeper into the peaceful hush of the evening. Ahead, the market square opens before you once again, bathed now in the soft glow of dusk. The golden light lingering like a whispered promise, settling on the old stones and worn wooden stalls that stand frozen in their daily places. You see the basket of apples, the pile of herbs, the empty wooden bench, each holding its shape as firmly as it did earlier in the day. The fountain's glassy surface mirrors the deepening sky, still and unbroken, reflecting the first stars beginning to twinkle faintly in the fading light. You walk slowly around its edge, your fingers tracing the cool stone rim as the quiet weight of the moment settles around you like a gentle shawl. The scent of warm bread drifts faintly from an unseen oven, mingling with the dry, crisp smell of fallen leaves scattered across the square, their brittle edges untouched by wind or footsteps. You notice the soft flutter of a curtain through a half-open window, its linen pale and shimmering softly in the evening light, hanging like a silent invitation to step inside this world caught between day and night. The shadows cast by the stalls and lampposts deepen, but remain motionless, pressed against the stones like old friends holding their places with quiet devotion. There is no hurry here, no rush to change or move forward, only the tender embrace of a day stretched thin into a moment without end. You find a place to sit on the edge of the fountain once more, your hands resting lightly on its cool surface, the stone smooth and steady beneath your touch. The air around you is filled with the mingled scents of lavender, warm earth, and the faintest trace of smoke from hearths preparing for the night ahead. The soft light glimmers against the water, creating ripples of gold and silver that dance without movement, frozen in a timeless rhythm. You close your eyes and let the stillness wrap around you, a quiet comfort settling deep inside like a whispered memory from long ago. When you open your eyes again, the square is exactly as it was, shadows holding their breath, light lingering gently on every surface, and you know that this moment, this delicate pause, will remain with you long after you have left, a secret held softly in your heart, like the silent promise of shadows that do not move. The evening deepens, wrapping the market square in a velvet hush that feels like a gentle sigh pressed against your skin. You linger beneath the soft glow of a lantern hanging from a wrought iron bracket, its light spilling in tender pools across the smooth stones, warming their ancient faces with a flicker of gold. The air is cooler now, but not sharp. It carries a soft sweetness, like crushed wildflowers, mingling with the faint trace of smoke from distant chimneys, preparing their fires for the night. You breathe it in slowly, feeling it settle quietly in your chest, a calm warmth that seems to grow from the earth beneath your feet and rise like a gentle tide to cradle you. Around you, the square stretches vast and still, as though it has held its breath for a moment too long, reluctant to let go of the day. The shadows here are deep and steadfast, cast like delicate ink stains on the weathered stones, yet they remain utterly still, as if the very air between light and dark has grown heavy and unyielding. You trace your gaze along the outlines of the wooden stalls, their paint faded to soft whispers of blue and green, the intricate carvings on their edges worn smooth by decades of quiet use. Each detail feels etched with the memory of hands long gone, the stories of faces that have come and gone, laughter that has echoed and softened into silence. You walk slowly, your footsteps a soft rhythm that seems to dissolve into the stillness around you. The scent of old wood and earth mingles with a faint note of something sweet and warm, perhaps honey or ripened fruit. From a basket left untouched beneath one stall, the basket's woven fibers are rough but yielding under your fingers, carrying the faint warmth of the day, as if holding onto a secret it is not quite ready to release. You pause to let your hand linger on the cool surface of a wooden post, the texture rough and comforting, grounding you in this quiet moment where time feels both stretched and condensed, like a breath held deep within your chest. Looking up, you catch sight of the sky just beyond the rooftops, its color shifting slowly from soft lavender to deep indigo, stars beginning to sprinkle their pale light across the velvet canvas. The first of them twinkle faintly, like distant fireflies caught in a gentle breeze that does not stir the shadows below. You imagine the sky holding the day's final sigh, wrapping the world in its soft embrace before the quiet darkness of night settles fully. Around you the lamps flicker as if stirred by a whispered wind, their flames steady and sure, casting halos of amber light that spill like liquid warmth across the stones. You settle onto a low stone wall near the edge of the square, your hands resting lightly on your knees. The coolness of the stone a delicate contrast against the warmth of your skin. The silence here is full and rich, filled with the soft breathing of the world as it prepares to drift into sleep. You listen closely, catching the faintest rustle of a curtain in a distant window, the gentle tapping of a shutter closed against the night, and the slow, rhythmic beating of your own heart, steady and calm. In this place where shadows do not move, where light and dark hold each other tenderly, you feel a deep peace settle within you, a quiet knowing that some moments are made to be held softly, treasured like the last note of a lullaby. When you rise to leave, the square remains as it has been, still, silent, and bathed in the gentle glow of evening's light. You carry with you the memory of this calm, this slow, unfolding grace, a secret kept safe in the folds of your heart, like a shadow that never moves but always stays near. The air grows cooler now, draping the market square in a soft, quiet shroud that feels like a whispered secret between the fading light and the deepening night. You move slowly, your footsteps cushioned by the soft dust that has settled over the stones, and the scent of earth and dried herbs rises gently with every breath you take. Above you, the sky shifts from dusky lavender to a deep velvet indigo, stars beginning to prick softly through the twilight, their distant light steady and calm, like tiny lanterns guiding the world into rest. The air carries a faint hint of smoke from hearth fires kindling in homes nearby, mingling with the gentle perfume of jasmine and the lingering warmth of sun-soaked stone. You find yourself drawn once again toward the old well nestled near the corner of the square, its rim worn smooth by countless hands long since vanished into memory. The stones are cool and reassuring beneath your touch, and you lean forward, peering into the quiet darkness of its depths, where only shadow resides, still and unbroken, a mirror to the unmoving shadows stretched across the square. Around the well, the faint rustle of a dried leaf stirs softly in the gentle night breeze, its edges curled like the pages of a forgotten book. You imagine the stories held deep within those stones, whispered by the water long ago, lingering in the cool, still air that settles like a soft embrace. The stalls surrounding the square have emptied now, their wares folded away beneath cloths that carry the subtle scent of lavender and cedar, as though the night itself has been woven into their folds. You run your fingers gently along the edge of one, feeling the rough texture of the fabric, cool and tender against your skin. Nearby, a basket sits forgotten, filled with late-season apples whose skin is mottled and soft with ripeness. Their sweet scent drifts faintly in the air, a quiet reminder of harvests past, of days filled with laughter and gentle labor under the sun. You pick one up, its surface smooth and warm, and press it lightly to your cheek before setting it back down with a soft sigh. The amber hues spill onto the stones below, pooling in gentle halos that touch the unmoving shadows but never disturb them. You watch as the light dances quietly, tracing the delicate edges of the carvings and faded paint. The very heart of the market, preserved in this suspended moment of calm. The world around you hums with the quiet pulse of evening settling in, a slow and steady rhythm that seems to cradle every breath, every step, in a soothing embrace. You find a place to sit on the low stone wall nearby, its surface smooth and cool beneath your fingers, and close your eyes for a moment, letting the stillness wash over you like a lullaby sung softly in a forgotten tongue. The gentle scent of jasmine and wood smoke swirls around you, mingling with the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird settling in its nest. In this sacred hush, the unmoving shadows of the market square feel less like silence and more like a gentle pause, a breath held tenderly between moments where time itself seems to slow and unfold like the petals of a night-blooming flower. When you open your eyes again, the stars have brightened further, their pale light steady and sure, as though they too watch over this still, quiet world. You rise slowly, carrying the memory of this evening wrapped softly around your heart, the scent of jasmine, the warmth of stone, the gentle glow of lantern light, and the profound peace of shadows that do not move. With one last glance at the tranquil square, you step quietly away, knowing that this moment, like a whispered secret, will stay with you long after the night has fully claimed the sky. The night settles gently over the market square, a soft velvet cloak embroidered with the faintest silver of distant stars. You find yourself once again standing at the edge of this quiet world, where the shadows remain unmoving, resting like gentle whispers on the ancient stones beneath your feet. The air is cool but tender, carrying the delicate scent of lavender, mingled with the faint warmth of embers still glowing softly in hearths nearby. You breathe it in deeply, feeling the calm seep into your skin, the softness of the night wrapping around you like a familiar shawl, comforting and true. Around you, the square lies silent and still, every detail etched in the tender glow of lantern light, the worn wooden stalls draped in cloths, that sway not in the breeze, but in the hush of memory. The fountain's glassy surface reflecting the pale moonlight like a quiet mirror holding the day's last secrets. You trace your fingers lightly along the cool stone rim of the fountain, its surface smooth and steady beneath your touch, as if it too has held this stillness for centuries. A steadfast guardian of moments lost and found. The scent of earth and wood smoke lingers softly, carried on a night air that feels both infinite and intimately close, folding you gently into the embrace of a world paused between dreams and waking. You sit down slowly on the edge of the fountain, the stone cool but welcoming beneath you, and close your eyes to the quiet symphony of the night, the distant murmur of leaves, the faint rustle of a curtain stirred by an unseen hand, the gentle pulse of your own breath mingling with the calm. In this suspended moment, the unmoving shadows no longer feel like emptiness, but like a delicate promiser, silent story held close to the heart, waiting to be remembered in the soft glow of twilight. The stillness cradles you, tender and true, a lullaby sung without words, a breath held deep within the quiet. When you open your eyes, the stars above twinkle faintly, as if sharing their own gentle stories, each one a shimmering thread woven into the vast tapestry of night. You rise with slow, deliberate grace, the memory of this evening wrapped like a secret gift in the folds of your being, the scent of lavender and warm stone, the touch of cool water and smooth wood, the soft light that lingers just beyond shadow's edge. As you step away from the square, the unmoving shadows remain, steadfast and serene, a quiet echo of this moment that will live softly within you, like a gentle whisper carried on the night wind. And so the day the shadows didn't move becomes more than a memory, it becomes a tender place within you, a quiet sanctuary where time slows and the heart listens closely to the soft unfolding of light and dark, of stillness and breath, held forever in the gentle pause of a day that never quite ended.